All right, all right, all right. Everybody back in your chairs. It is time for the Doc Owen Show. Welcome back or welcome aboard. We're glad you're here. My name is Dr. Richard Owen. I am joined in the Hilltop Studios tonight by...
I'm Mr. Fry.
And...
Uncle Bachi.
Boom, bada bang. And we're ready to go. Good show for you tonight. We've got some voices from the past we're gonna play for you that I think you will... I hope they're memorable for you. And we are all over the social media as Doc Owen Show, DocOwenShow. Prime spot to kind of catch up is Twitter, as well as you can download either one of our free apps for the Android or the iPhone, and that's where all of our podcasts are stored. You're more than welcome to download the free app and click and listen to the shows, go back, catch items that you're interested in, etc. Move them around, share them with your friends. The share with your friends is real important. That's how we grow this thing called the Doc Owen Show. Now in year 5, that's what the numbers at the show heading mean. Y5.27 means that this is our 27th show of our 5th year. So we are one show beyond mid-year, right?
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, I put it in Excel, so I'm pretty sure 26 is halfway to 52.
I would venture to say that's correct.
Yeah. I did it twice just to check my math.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Multiply, then divide, then
There,
multiply.
there you go.
Yep.
What else do we need to tell them? That's it. We're all over the airwaves. We're if you want to listen to us live, if you're listening to the podcast and you want to listen to it fresh, like, well, I know that if this is the first time you listen to the podcast, it's fresh, right? But if you really want to hear it live and in person as it's created, like real time, it's called, for those of you not familiar, then you need to go to Spreaker. Spreaker, Spreaker.com, and follow us. All you got to do is put in your email address and create a Spreaker account. That's all there is to it. And then find the Doc Owen Show and follow us. Do a search for us and follow us on Spreaker, and you then will get notices, et cetera, about our live Thursday night show. And it's a straight shot to listen to it. Other than that, you can go to our Facebook page. It's out there right after the show is over. You can, like I said, follow us on Twitter. You'll get a little tweet that says we're live. Click here, yada, yada, yada. So there's all sorts of ways to connect. We always begin the show beyond those self-promotional items in a very traditional manner. Ms. Surefire starts out with an inspirational quote. Uncle Bachi follows with something about this day in history. And then I'll wind up the trio with a leadership quote or leadership thought. So, Ms. Surefire, take it away.
And tonight's quote comes from PassItOn.com. I've been getting a lot of quotes from them, so they might be my new staple for quotes. And tonight's quote comes from a gentleman that I think most of us have heard one time or another, by the name of Nelson Mandela.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
I even saw a movie about him.
Yeah, he's got a funny little instrument named after him.
The mandolin.
The mandala.
Yeah.
The mandolin.
Wank, wank, wank. So Nelson Mandela was a political leader, philanthropist, and at one time the president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999.
After he served a very long term in prison.
Yes.
Unjustly, as they say.
Exactly.
Okay, go ahead.
And his quote is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world."
Boom.
Boom is right. Boy,
Bada boom.
that nail got driven in, didn't it? That's good.
Uno más. Please. One more time.
Oh, okay, sure. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world.
There you go.
That's right.
I'm in.
It's changing America.
I'm in.
But
Yeah.
we'll talk about that.
Okay. Bachi,
Machi.
What happened?
That's me. Well, two things I have for tonight. March 15th, Thursday. The state of Maine in 1820 became a state, the Union. It joined the Union.
But see,
We recently talked about
but
that.
it was March the 15th, but it wasn't a Thursday.
True.
Okay.
March 15th, whatever day of the month
Okay.
that was.
Okay.
Back then. You're right. Thank you for the
That's okay.
enlightenment. And then also, this one really ticks me off. Anyway, 1965, Johnson calls for equal voting rights.
Oh.
The guy who, let's not get on to him.
We'll get to him
We'll
when
get
we
to
get
him.
Right there.
in due time. We will
We'll-
get to
we
President
definitely
Johnson.
will.
Yeah. And we will
If I
enlighten
last that long.
we will enlighten the world with a Texas perspective on President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Okay? So that was it? You're still
Yeah, that's it
Oh,
for
you
today.
had two up. Give me the 1965.
Yeah,
March 15th, 1965.
right.
The Voting Rights Act was passed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, actually, that was the date that he addressed the joint Congress to encourage them to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
That's
what
what
it
he
was.
unveiled
And it
his
was
plan.
passed. Right, it was passed very shortly thereafter.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. Our leadership quote tonight comes from a fellow by the name of Steve Jobs. If you're not familiar, Mr. Jobs is responsible for a company by the name of Apple, among other things. But that's his largest claim to fame. Steve said, if you are working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you.
That's a good one.
Make sense?
It sure does.
So do what you're excited about. Stay focused. Go after it.
Absolutely.
A la Doc Owen show. Okay, I'm not going to go into what the show is about because that'll give away some of the information. One of the things, our special guest tonight, we have a clip from Charlton Heston that I happened to see on Facebook today, and I did the research, found it on YouTube. I found out that it was available to be shared copyright-wise, that YouTube has a little, they've now joined the creative, what's it called? It's there's a CC at the bottom of the video on YouTube that stands for Creative Commons. So if you put a YouTube out there and you put the CC at the bottom, that means anybody can use it anywhere, anytime, in order to get the word out. The original video was actually produced by NRA TV, and some of you may or may not know Charlton Heston was their spokesperson. So we downloaded it, and you won't be able to see the video. We can only see that here in the studio, but you'll be able to listen to what he had to say. Before we go down that path, we continue our process of going through all of the previous presidents from the particular perspective. What we went searching for in the first place was based on the amount of pushback that Donald Trump is getting from the opposition party, as well as the media and some really loud voices, et cetera, that just will not let him run the country,
Right.
without carping. And so we wanted to know how long has this been going on? In other words, did other presidents have to put up with it?
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's one of the things we're
Except for George Washington, most of them had to put up with some.
right, and that's what we're.
And tonight's a good example.
That's kind of what sent us down this path, and tonight's a good example.
Yes.
So who did they not like tonight?
We started with Franklin Pierce
Right.
last week, and this
Right.
is part 2.
Okay.
So he's the 14th president.
Right.
Okay.
So we are a little over a third of the way through.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So we're going to talk a little bit about his domestic policy and then a few other things. One of the major issues, as you probably have noticed over the last few sessions that we've had, was, of course, slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal.
Right.
Specifically, slavery in the territories.
Yes.
You know, we had gotten a lot of new land from the Louisiana Purchase.
Yep.
And then the Mexican War, we got all that and everything.
Right.
So everything was growing. And there was this thought, mostly in the South, that they wanted to have an equal number of states that were slave states
Yes.
as free states.
Sure.
Because they wanted to preserve their power in the Senate. You know, they didn't want to get the North to get overpowered in the Senate. So they kept on insisting. And
Because a very important, what I think is an important part of that, we are still in the time in America where the governor of the state appointed the senators.
that's correct. Well, the legislature actually.
Well, the governor
Yeah.
sort of said, "Here's
Yeah,
my
this is your
recommendations,"
yeah.
and the state legislatures approved it. The
Right.
point being is that the senators were not elected.
Right.
Their original job was to represent the state
Exactly.
from whence they came. The state, not the people of the state. That was the House of Representatives' job.
That's correct.
Okay, so I wanted everybody to
Yes.
understand the significance of what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry.
Absolutely.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. No, that's appreciated. So they the problem with it really was that in this particular instance was, remember the compromise of 1850, and there was another one in 1820, which banned slavery in the area of the Kansas-Nebraska territory.
Yeah, sort of vaguely.
Yeah.
I wasn't able
Yeah.
to make the meeting,
Yeah.
but I remember
Well,
the discussion.
Yeah, and so the issue came up again. A gentleman that we'll be hearing a little bit more of, his name is Stephen Douglas. He was a senator from Illinois. Does anything good come out of Illinois besides Lincoln?
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going here. We're not going to get... I like to chase rabbits. I'm sorry. So he was, in 1854, he was the chairman of a committee that oversaw new states coming in and all that kind of thing. And what he proposed was popular sovereignty. That is, and we've talked about this before, that is, let the territories do their, decide which they wanted to be. Okay? That was called popular sovereignty. Okay? So he had personal reasons to settle this issue. Nobody has settled it. It's still North and South, still slavery, anti-slavery, because he hoped that the new territories would there was going to be a transcontinental railroad, and he wanted it to be north from Chicago to wherever on the West Coast. I'm not sure, but he wanted it to be a northerly route.
Right.
Another thing that happened during this time is that the United States had negotiations with Mexico to buy a piece of land that now has become part of New Mexico and Arizona.
Okay.
Because there was a clear route through there. You don't have to worry about the mountains for them to build a railroad. So they negotiated with Mexico.
I got news for you. Clear. There is nothing through there.
Yeah. Right. I don't even know if a railroad goes through there. Okay.
I mean, it's just
Zero.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Till
So-
this day.
Yep. So he wanted to pass another act, which was the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They passed it, and this is for popular sovereignty, and Pierce signed it.
Okay.
Pierce was kind of like, okay,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. He was.
tell me what to do.
He was a fence
Yeah,
hunter.
yeah,
Right.
he definitely was, very much so, and it cost him the next election.
If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Yeah.
That's right.
Some people think that this particular
Aaron Tippin.
act was one of the most influential pieces of legislation in American history. And it was. It had some pretty
Far-reaching effects.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's
I was
okay.
searching for those words.
That's what happens when
Okay.
you start late.
Now, the Democrats, however, at this point in time were very weakened, especially Douglas and Pierce. They're both Democrats. And the Northern Democrats were split over the measure. It was intended to lessen the controversy, but the act did just the opposite. It just made everybody more angry and more. Why are Americans angry? We are today, too. Okay, so there was bloodshed in Kansas. The new territory, it became the nation's battleground. So they did have a lot of bloodshed in that period of time. The president, Pierce, he was a long time disdain for abolitionists. So he didn't really like people. However, he was not opposed to it either. So he was, like you said, I'm going to sit on the fence and I'm going to try to please everybody. And that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, which means
The leaders were trying to please everybody.
you don't please anybody.
So that violence it was pretty extensive and bloody. In his foreign policy, like several of his predecessors, Franklin Pierce found foreign policy very welcome. Welcome change from all this domestic stuff that was going on. So, unfortunately, though, his lack of leadership and his tendency to give in to pressure groups. Yeah. See where he is?
He's a Democrat.
Yeah. It really hampered his effectiveness in the foreign area.
Yep.
Okay. So, and they were also upset with him because he chose Jefferson Davis as his Secretary of War.
Ooh.
So this guy was just piling up things against himself. We paid $15 million for the Gadsden purchase, and it was Senator James Gadsden who negotiated it. So,
In case our audience doesn't know the consequences or what you're saying when you say Jefferson Davis became his Secretary of War.
Right.
Jefferson Davis, now you're the historian, so correct
ahead.
me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Jefferson Davis is the guy that became the president of the Confederacy.
that is
when
absolutely correct.
when they split apart, right?
Absolutely
so
correct.
He's bound to have had some of those leanings while serving as Secretary of War under the president. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and the treaty also included, and this is something people may not know, that would allow the U.S. to build a transoceanic canal.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Really?
But guess where?
Between two oceans?
Between the Atlantic, I guess you would say the Atlantic or Gulf of Mexico and the
Well, they probably wanted to do it in Florida.
yeah. Well, Florida? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But what this transoceanic canal was to be built in the isthmus, not of Panama, but the isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is in Mexico. It's southern Mexico, the Oaxaca area. So that's what they wanted to do, which they never did do. They never agreed to go ahead and do it, even though it was in there. He also wanted to annex Cuba. Cuba is for some of those. And that was also a very, people weren't, we got in trouble with Spain over that. But they finally got together and they drafted something called the Austin Manifesto, which it was warned that if Cuba refused America's proposal, that they would use military force against them. It never came to that. So Cuba today is still a communist state. May have been part of the United States. England, Central America, and Asia Pacific there was Pierce, the British ambassador, okay, to the U.S. for his recruitment of former British immigrants as soldiers to fight the Crimean War in Russia, which was not a popular thing either. But see, Russia was attacking the Crimea back then. Guess what Russia? It's still doing it.
It's cold.
Well, not in the Crimea, it's not.
It's cold all over Russia.
No.
They got to do something to stay warm. They fight.
Yeah.
They drink vodka and
Yeah.
fight.
Okay, and where am I? Am I over time? 2 minutes? Okay. So Nicaragua also became an issue because Pierce recognized a dictatorship in Nicaragua, and he wanted to start slavery in Nicaragua. He wanted to become, a slave, just like Cuba was very much a slave society.
Okay.
So,
Well, he
let's
should have
see
just
here.
put the CIA on it. They did that.
Yeah,
take care
he
of that
should
for
have. He should have. So,
blamed it
the
on the
accomplishments of Franklin Pierce very quickly. In 1853, the U.S. bought a stretch of land, and that was the Gadsden Purchase, so we've got that.
Yeah.
1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which gave us popular sovereignty.
Yep.
He supported the bill with great dissension and much fighting in the territory, so
Yeah.
it wasn't a peaceful thing. After he was the president, he retired to New Hampshire, and he traveled between Europe and Bahamas. But what happened to him is because of all these things, these controversial things, and because of his lack of leadership, the Democrats would not renominate him.
Right.
So the Democrats, this is a parallel too. The Democratic Party left him.
Yeah, yeah.
And we know somebody else that's happened to.
Yep.
Few. Okay. So that's about it. I'll finish with a quote because
There you go.
it's good. The storm of frenzy and faction must inevitably dash itself in vain against the unshaken rock of the Constitution. I shall never doubt it. That was in his third annual message.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like the closing piece of it.
Yeah.
Yep. And it plays right into exactly what we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay.
So I
and
mentioned-
my name is
There you
Uncle
go.
Bocce at DocOwenShow.com. It's UNCLEBACI.
Thank you, Uncle Bob.
Good job.
If you have any questions,
Franklin
email
Pierce. So who are we going to learn about next week?
me. James Buchanan.
Oh,
Who?
boy.
Who?
No, I know all these people. I
I've
used to have
heard-
little white statues that had their names at the bottom.
Oh.
I'd stack them up, line them up, put them in the right order. My grandmother teacher would come by and say, nope, that's wrong. And then I'd have to go. She wouldn't tell me what was right. Just,
Yeah. And by the way, just finished the Whig Party. The Whig Party is no longer at this
So
point.
we don't have to hear Whig anymore.
No, it's gone.
Good. Good. I think I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
They were misnomered anyway. We're going to start a movement tonight.
Yay.
And I want to get out in front of mostly the Democrats this time. I want to get out in front of everybody else on this, and there's gonna be some. Did he really say that? Reaction to what I have to say. All right.
Okay.
So let me preface it with my condolences to the people that were injured, families, people that were killed, all of that stuff on the Florida pedestrian bridge. It was a walking bridge, a pedestrian bridge that we see all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. So the movement. So there were a lot of people killed. So I want all pedestrian bridges closed and no more to be built.
What about the ones for the deer?
That's
Never
different. That's different.
Okay. I'm sorry.
We've
Go
got
ahead.
too much invested in training the deer right now.
Yeah.
You're in training
But
camp.
but just like banning guns, we now must ban pedestrian
That's
bridges
right.
because
They kill people.
they kill people.
That's right.
So I just want to put that out there that we're the first
Okay.
to come up with the ban bridges.
There we go.
or
BBA.
bad bridges or whatever.
BBA. Yep.
Before we hear from Charlton Heston, because that's going to send us down a whole different path, and we've talked about it before, and we've talked about it very recently in terms of gun control. And that's the segue from the bridge thing. But before we go there, are you aware, either one of you and in the audience, are you, and we're all over the left coast, so this should really ring a bell with our audience out there. California is the swing state in a major national election coming up.
Okay.
In Mexico.
Oh.
Mexican advertising and the election that's going on in Mexico is referring to California, the voters that they have in California being the swing state for the country's elections.
Wow.
Think about that for a minute.
It hurts. You're
I think
pinching.
you need to continue the wall.
I think you're pinching my brain here.
Well, there's a book out, and I read it probably 3, 4, 5 years, no, more than that now, maybe 10 years ago, about it was a futurist that wrote it, and he premised the fact, he had an entire chapter on the fact that you may well see someday a United States congressman who also is a congressman in Mexico. Because neither country has a law against it. As long as he's a U.S. citizen and doesn't even have to be he can run, he can be a U.S. representative in both countries. So I think we need to be mentally prepared for somebody, whoever Nancy Pelosi's replacement is, or whoever Maxine Waters or one of those other nutty Congress representatives from California. I mean, that can't be their best and brightest that they send to us. Anyway, that could be a representative in 2 different countries. California is the swing state in a Mexican election. Can you imagine? That's a sad state of affairs.
That sure
I
is.
can understand why the President of the United States went out there to survey his options of a wall when he could have done it anywhere else but California. He chose to do it right there in front of them, to say, this is what's coming. Anyway, I found that kind of amusing.
It is, yeah.
So the title of this video, as it is on YouTube, is A Torch with No Flame. It speaks to the exact reason the Doc Owen Show exists. And we being the 3 of us and you guys that are listening and spreading the word on the show, about the show, we all should be very proud that we are doing our part. Now, I want you to listen to this clip from Charlton Heston, and the name of it is A Torch with No Flame, talking about passing the torch to the next generation. Go ahead, Ms. Surefire.
You believe in the Second Amendment to the Constitution, right? I mean, you consider yourself a keeper of the flame, and you intend to pass that torch on to the next generation of Americans. So tell me, if you could see into the next century and know whether the Second Amendment is still intact or in shambles, would you look? If someone could predict the outcome 100 years from now of all your conviction and commitment and hard work, would you listen? Well, you can.
What guarantees me freedom? Oh, that's a hard question.
What is the Constitution?
I don't know.
Gives me freedom? I don't know.
Will they be the keepers of the flame?
No, I do not think everybody should have the right to own a gun.
What is the Constitution? I don't know.
Guns, in general, are very bad.
What is the Constitution? I don't know.
What's the Constitution? I don't know.
Will they carry the torch?
I have no idea what the Second Amendment is.
An amendment is...
What do I know about the Second Amendment? Let me think.
What is the Second Amendment? You got me there. I don't know.
What's the Second Amendment? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Something's gone wrong. For all our vigilance and battle scars over the Bill of Rights, have we let the flame of freedom's torch grow cold? Because there can be no torch to pass where there's no flame. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment. Textbooks ignore it, schools teach against it, clergy preach against it, politicians legislate against it, media ridicule it, movies pervert it, courts avoid it, and too many gun owners permit it. So it's not unreasonable that with one lost generation, we could lose the Second Amendment forever. Because we didn't teach them what the battle's all about. We didn't strike that spark in their hearts that lights the fire for freedom. So why does that belief burn so brightly in you and me? Our core beliefs are the work of all the men and women of our childhoods. A constellation of people who orbited around us, tugging here, pushing there, day after day as we grew, shaping our beliefs, carving our characters until we became who we are. Do you remember them? Parents who didn't just talk about values, but who lived out those values. The gym coach whose knotted rope taught you to pull your own weight. The scoutmaster who surely had a job and a family to tend to, but always made time for you. The clergyman whose moral compass helped guide your way. The grocery store owner who played along with mom in an unscripted scolding that ended your candy pilfering days forever. The principal whose handmade paddle was somehow comforting. It meant punishment was certain, so was forgiveness. The neighborhood teenager who bragged about joining the army, but whose silence after the war taught you even more. The teacher who stood up for the weak and stared down the bully. The neighborhood policeman who didn't just know the law, he knew everything you were thinking. That stranger you watched at the football game who, during the national anthem, unknowingly guided your hand over your heart. And that woman by him, her eyes fixed in the flag, who taught you patriotism isn't just for guys. All those people, they gave you a sense of geography about your life, where you fit in, right and wrong. Each of us is a tapestry of threads woven by all of them. They understood their part in the pattern of personal responsibility, freedom, honesty, justice, the Bill of Rights. That is the living torch they passed to us. Imagine if every kid had learned what we learned, that without a Second Amendment, by what means could a free people expect to protect freedom? We learned that. History proves it. Common sense confirms it, and any school kid can grasp it. Only people who are free to own firearms can remain free people. If every kid could just learn that a gun is a thing to be handled with care and respect and, yes, honor. Because beneath all the trappings of hobby and camaraderie and sport, a firearm is the fundamental symbol of our freedom. Because a firearm gives the most common of common men the most simple and supreme right to pursue life and liberty and happiness in accordance with and under the protection of the law. That's why the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is the passion we must ignite in those who follow. All of us who feel that surge of pride, who chill at the genuine glory of a free people able to protect their own freedom. So what are we doing about it? Yes, we can blame violent crime or Sarah Brady or the media or bullet-riddled movies, and certainly some blame is due. But what effort has our generation spent to make sure the next generation feels as deeply as we do? If we focus on anti-gun legislation but ignore an anti-gun generation, if we spend years as pro-gun activists but only minutes as pro-gun mentors, if we've earned the support of this generation of office holders but not the next generation of voters, we will have failed. We must tell it, teach it, live it, breathe it. Every one of us born beneath this blessed American sky has rights nobody can take away, because no one gave them to us. They were ours from the beginning. Each of us has a birth certificate, but it didn't give us life. It just put on paper what everybody already knows. We are alive. In the same way, the Constitution didn't give us rights. It just put on paper what everybody already knows. We are free to say and write and think and work and worship as we choose. We're free to own a firearm, and that right shall not be infringed. If you consider yourself a freedom-loving patriot, you can't shirk your duty to teach America's young to understand the Second Amendment, to revere it, to embrace it, to defend it, and in their turn, to bequeath it. That's what we have to do. We, the teachers, the neighbors, the clergy, the uncles, the grocers, the legislators, the scoutmasters, the parents, the Americans. Only then can we pass the torch with that sacred flame that lights the American way.
That is one of those.
Wow.
Gee, I wished I'd have said that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it didn't bring a tear to your eye,
That was.
or make you well up just a little bit towards the middle of what he had to say, then God bless you. I mean, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Because that was really pulled at your heartstrings, and he's absolutely true. I'll tell you one of the things. Go ahead.
No,
Bocce.
I was just going to say, it just reminds me that things that people say that are based on principle are eternal.
Yes.
What he said, how many years ago that was, it
Not
applies
that-
today,
not
and
that
it
long
applied.
ago. It was Sarah Brady is who he was referencing. So
Yeah, so
and the video
you
shows
know,
him. He's pretty
it's,
old.
it's just it amazes me. It amazes me, and
Right,
all the
right.
gobbledygook that people spout out. Eventually, nobody's even going to know what it is.
Let me one of the things that it caused me to think about, besides other things. I mean, I literally the first time that I saw it and heard it, teared up. Sitting in my desk watching it come across Facebook. I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? And
Really?
that's the reason I had to go get it and put it on the air. And I can assure you, we will run it again. Maybe not tonight,
Absolutely.
but it'll be out there again. We have had shows on the Second Amendment, guns rights, the Bill of Rights, and said most all of what Mr. Heston just laid out there for you, but not nearly so eloquently, maybe quite passionately, because we understand that that's what it is about. But it made me think. This is the United States of America. I mean, we go from coast to coast and have activity and growth, and 300 million people plus probably in this land, most of which, the vast majority of which, are far more prosperous than a lot of countries in the world. I don't know the exact numbers, but I just know that we're blessed.
Yeah,
And we really are. And you don't know that until you go somewhere else.
that's right.
That's for sure.
But think about this. Back in the day, some guys who really didn't even know the Mississippi River existed, much less beyond, they had no clue how big we were. They put this Constitution and Bill of Rights in place, not knowing what we know today. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's right.
And to me, that's a primary reason that you ought to get fired up to support the Second Amendment, because they were coming out of a very tyrannical world that Uncle Bocce has explained to us time and time again before we went off on the presidents about all we had to put up with England and Europe and this and trade wars and all of the restrictions that were placed on the success of this country to keep it from. I mean, it was as bad as what they're throwing at Trump, if not worse. And yet these guys had the foresight to create this thing called a Constitution to hold the states together, and this thing called the Bill of Rights to protect our individual freedoms. And it's like Heston said, it's like a birth certificate. Birth certificate doesn't do it. It doesn't. All it does is put on paper what everybody already knows. You were born.
Yeah.
Right? And the Bill of Rights does the same thing. All it does is, and we've preached this on this show over and over again. All it does is put on paper, codify, however you want to pronounce it, what everybody knows. Freedom, the freedom of man.
Exactly.
And the Second Amendment is there to protect that freedom from any other tyrannical government that might come along.
That's right.
Right? I mean, I just thought it really moved me, that Heston thing. And if you care to, go out to YouTube and search on YouTube for NRA torch with no flame, and up will come the YouTube. And this, because it's a little confusing. I apologize I didn't give you the visual before he talked to those children, because there's children on the video and they look like they're maybe 10 to 12 years old or something like that. You know, they're at the point where if you are a Boy Scout, you're being taught how to fire a rifle. You get your first BB gun. You know, you're learning some of these things of respect and you know, how to be careful with it and all that kind of stuff. And he's talking to these children and they don't have a clue. I mean, they don't have a clue. And
they still don't.
That's the point.
That's a scary point.
We are right there. We have a generation that doesn't respect a firearm, doesn't know how to handle it. It doesn't know how to be careful with it, doesn't know what it's for, you know, and certainly doesn't honor it as protecting his freedom. They've been taught that they're dangerous. You shouldn't be anywhere around them. You shouldn't run around with people who have them. I mean, that's what they've been told. They've not been told why we have them. That's what Heston's saying. The community has fallen apart to support what we grew up with on so many different fronts. But this is one that is very critical. I mean, it's beyond education. I mean, there's just so many things, this is one area that if we lose a generation to this shall not be infringed deal in the Bill of Rights, it'll be infringed. And if you don't believe history, you're an idiot.
That's right.
Number one, you're just smooth ass an idiot. No other way to say it. Look at all the countries around the world that have confiscated guns. Check out where they are today and how many people were killed to get that country under control by some maniac.
You don't even have to go to country. Just look at Chicago. Right?
Right here in our own backyard.
Right? Exactly.
Guns are banned, and it's got a higher murder rate than a lot of countries around
That's
the world.
right.
In just one of our cities.
That's right.
So we've got, we must, it's incumbent upon everybody that listens to the show, no matter what the age, to do your part in educating and supporting the right view, the correct view, the historical view of why we have guns at all. The only reason that people use them to hunt is because it's faster and easier than learning to hunt with a bow. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a hunter.
Yeah.
But I respect everybody's ability to own a gun, even if you never ever fired except at the firing range, to make sure that it's clean and operational. That's okay. Hopefully that will be the case, Because if you're using it for self-protection and you fire it anywhere else besides the gun range, that means you've wound up in a bad spot, and it could, it gets ugly real fast. Mm-hmm. So, but we still must protect the right to own it, because it protects all the other freedoms liberty and freedoms that we have as human beings. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
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 So, I'm through preaching.
Well, that's awesome, though.
I would like to play it again. You want
Sure,
to? We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll have a couple of minutes after this. So now that you've had the background that these are children that he's talking to, listen to Mr. Heston one more time for those of you who joined the show late. Go.
You believe in the Second Amendment to the Constitution, right? I mean, you consider yourself a keeper of the flame, and you intend to pass that torch on to the next generation of Americans. So tell me, if you could see into the next century and know whether the Second Amendment is still intact or in shambles, would you look? If someone could predict the outcome 100 years from now of all your conviction and commitment and hard work, would you listen? Well, you can.
What guarantees me freedom? Oh, that's a hard question.
What is the Constitution? I don't know. Gives me freedom? I don't know.
Will they be the keepers of the flame?
No, I do not think everybody should have the right to own a gun.
What is the Constitution? I don't know.
Guns, in general, are very bad.
What is the Constitution? I don't know.
What's the Constitution? I don't know.
Will they carry the torch?
I have no idea what the Second Amendment is.
An amendment is...
What do I know about the Second Amendment?
Let me think. What is the Second Amendment? You got me there. I don't know.
What's the Second Amendment? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Something's gone wrong. For all our vigilance and battle scars over the Bill of Rights, have we let the flame of freedom's torch grow cold? Because there can be no torch to pass where there's no flame. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment. Textbooks ignore it, schools teach against it, clergy preach against it, politicians legislate against it, media ridicule it, movies pervert it, courts avoid it, and too many gun owners permit it. So it's not unreasonable that with one lost generation, we could lose the Second Amendment forever. Because we didn't teach them what the battle's all about. We didn't strike that spark in their hearts that lights the fire for freedom. So why does that belief burn so brightly in you and me? Our core beliefs are the work of all the men and women of our childhoods. A constellation of people who orbited around us, tugging here, pushing there, day after day as we grew, shaping our beliefs, carving our characters until we became who we are. Do you remember them? Parents who didn't just talk about values, but who lived out those values. The gym coach whose knotted rope taught you to pull your own weight. The scoutmaster who surely had a job and a family to tend to, but always made time for you. The clergyman whose moral compass helped guide your way. The grocery store owner who played along with Mom in an unscripted scolding that ended your candy pilfering days forever. The principal whose handmade paddle was somehow comforting. It meant punishment was certain, so was forgiveness. The neighborhood teenager who bragged about joining the army, but whose silence after the war taught you even more. The teacher who stood up for the weak and stared down the bully. The neighborhood policeman who didn't just know the law, he knew everything you were thinking. That stranger you watched at the football game who, during the national anthem, unknowingly guided your hand over your heart. And that woman by him, her eyes fixed in the flag, who taught you patriotism isn't just for guys. All all those people. They gave you a sense of geography about your life, where you fit in, right and wrong. Each of us is a tapestry of threads woven by all of them. They understood their part in the pattern of personal responsibility, freedom, honesty, justice, the Bill of Rights. That is the living torch they passed to us. Imagine if every kid had learned what we learned, that without a Second Amendment, by what means could a free people expect to protect freedom? We learned that. History proves it. Common sense confirms it, and any school kid can grasp it. Only people who are free to own firearms can remain free people. If every kid could just learn that a gun is a thing to be handled with care and respect, and yes, honor. Because beneath all the trappings of hobby and camaraderie and sport, a firearm is the fundamental symbol of our freedom. Because a firearm gives the most common of common men the most simple and supreme right to pursue life and liberty and happiness in accordance with and under the protection of the law. That's why the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is the passion we must ignite in those who follow. All of us who feel that surge of pride, who chill at the genuine glory of a free people able to protect their own freedom. So what are we doing about it? Yes, we can blame violent crime or Sarah Brady or the media or bullet-riddled movies, and certainly some blame is due. But what effort has our generation spent to make sure the next generation feels as deeply as we do? If we focus on anti-gun legislation but ignore an anti-gun generation, if we spend years as pro-gun activists but only minutes as pro-gun mentors, if we've earned the support of this generation of office holders but not the next generation of voters, we will have failed. We must tell it, teach it, live it, breathe it. Every one of us born beneath this blessed American sky has rights nobody can take away, because no one gave them to us. They were ours from the beginning. Each of us has a birth certificate, but it didn't give us life. It just put on paper what everybody already knows. We are alive. In the same way, the Constitution didn't give us rights. It just put on paper what everybody already knows. We are free to say and write and think and work and worship as we choose. We're free to own a firearm, and that right shall not be infringed. If you consider yourself a freedom-loving patriot, you can't shirk your duty to teach America's young to understand the Second Amendment, to revere it, to embrace it, to defend it, and in their turn, to bequeath it. That's what we have to do. We, the teachers, the neighbors, the clergy, the uncles, the grocers, the legislators, the scoutmasters, the parents, the Americans. Only then can we pass the torch with that sacred flame that lights the American way.
A right that shall not be infringed. Remember that. We need to keep the flame alive.
Yes.
I implore you to go out there and as you go through the week and help keep that flame alive. It must be there when the next generation comes into power. And they've got to understand why it is there. That's what we're lacking. It's not about the Second Amendment. It's not about gun rights. It's about protecting our freedoms.
That's right.
And liberty for which we stand, quote, unquote. The Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah. This reminded me a lot of.
Front row. Time to go. You have been listening to the Doc Owen Show. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. Now go out there this week and take care, pay attention, and God bless.
Bye-bye, folks. God bless.